everyone to the second season of the Great Minds Fireside Talks. And tonight it is an incredible privilege to have with us live from the V&A, Casely-Hayford. And we're going to be talking about three things in particular. Gus's incredibly colourful and energetic and diverse life. We're going to talk about his unbelievably exciting new job with the V&A East and everything that holds. And we're also going to talk about the issue of the day, month, year, which is about how can we get a better and fairer representation of BAME people across the arts, across the media, across the museum sector and beyond. But Gus, can you begin by describing this wonderfully colourful and rich room that you're in at the moment?
Well, I'm actually on the director's corridor in the Victorian Albert Museum, and I don't traditionally work here. I work about 6 miles in that direction in East London. And in East London, the V&A is building a new museum and collection centre. But today I just happen to be here at South Ken, which is our hub. It's our home. It's the place where Henry Cole began this V&A story with this incredible proposition, which speaks to the 21st century just as powerful as it did to the 19th, about the power of art and about the power of design, and to really impact people's lives and to change people's opportunities. And Cole was an amazing figure, and his words and his aspirations, which I've really tried to read about, that they do speak to the 21st century. This is about empowering people through skills, through creativity, through contact with really great art. And the V&A has tried and has succeeded in doing that over many generations. And I feel enormously privileged in being part of this chapter and in building a new V&A museum to sit alongside the South Ken building and the other buildings in the V&A family to hopefully invite a new audience into our museums.
And truly it is one of the great museums in the world, as indeed was the Smithsonian, from which you came. More on that later. The first question, which I'm going to take now, but just as a provocation and a reminder to everybody, particularly those who maybe hadn't attended any of the 35 of these talks we've had so far, that it's very much about questions and answers and debate. And we have a question which I'll take just at the beginning now, which is Chris, which is picking up on what you're saying there, Gus. And, appreciation of art, is an educated person's passion, he suggests. How can the rest of the world become more enthused about art? And I'm wondering, we were talking about your help for the Royal Shakespeare Company and Papadoudou's famous performance of Hamlet. And when Shakespeare was writing his plays, it wasn't just the educated, obviously, who were looking when the Victorians, when the museum was open. It wasn't just the educated. Are we less educated? And what can we do to get more people interested and enthusing about the arts and culture?
If we go back to the origins of the V&A, Henry Cole is this amazing figure who is driven by a passion for great design, great art, and he wants to use it as a tool to transform the lives of ordinary people. And not long after the establishment of the Great Exhibition, which was the forerunner of the V&A, he Henry Mayhew, who was a Punch journalist, he goes to see a great exhibition and he is utterly transfixed by it. And he wants to find out where are the communities of makers who have given up their incredible skills to create an awful lot of the work that he sees on display. And he travels out to East London, to the part of London where we are creating this new museum, and he sees it as this place which is incredibly run down, incredibly it's deprived, but at the same time it is a kind of creative engine that he sees it. He describes it as a place of makers, of weavers, of carpenters, of spinners, and there is something about that bit of London which has always been enormously creative, and irrespective of class and education, it has given up some of the most creative and inspirational figures. It's the place that gives us Alexander McQueen within the last few generations, and it continues to do so. And so it may well be that we want to, that many arts institutions feel a little bit rarefied and perhaps even a bit snobbish, but at their root, so many of them were driven by a need to speak and to bind communities together of all kinds. If one thinks about the founding of the National Trust, again, an institution which is about beauty, driven by beauty, but again, it was about ordinary people having access not just to the countryside, but to beautiful things. And
yeah.
That impetus, I think, is still very much part and parcel of the things which drive so many people involved in the arts, but particularly is the thing that I want to see as the core focus of V&A East.
Can you be fully educated? Can you be fully human, Gus, without an interest in the arts?
Well, I personally think it is the finest manifestation of humanity. And you know, when you go to really ancient archaeological sites, as I have done in places like Africa, Olduvai Gorge, and you look at communities many of whom were battling against the environment for their survival, but they still made incredible statements that were about them defining existentially who they were through beauty. It is as fundamental to us as anything else. I think about one of the great African artists, Ibrahim El Salahi, who was, for a period, he was a culture minister, and at the end of his time as a culture minister, a new administration came in and he was put in prison, and they took away all of his tools to create art. But he continued to make paintings, and his guards would say to him, look, if you continue to draw and paint, we will punish you. So they took away everything that they could, that he could draw and paint on. So he would find in the dirt, in the yard, little cigarette butts or cigarette packets, and he would draw on those. And even then they would threaten him with punishment, but he recognized that as important as his life was his need to create. I think if we were denied art, we would understand its importance. And I am hoping as we go forward, I mean, particularly coming out of COVID, navigating our way through the post-Brexit world, that there will be opportunities for us to demonstrate how art is important in crafting a kind of space in which we can come together and do some healing. It's a wonderful tool for dealing with difficult issues, and also a way of working them through in ways that are cathartic to many.
And we should mention there Ken Robinson, a great encourager of the arts worldwide, who died this week, who gave, I think it's still the most popular TED talk of all time. You yourself, Gus, gave a celebrated TED talk. But is the creating of art uniquely human? Do any other species create art?
Well, I mean, there are other primates with, you know, who find ways of interacting that may seem creative, but there is something about human communication and creation which is special, a kind of space within which we have created the room for a form of abstraction which is something extraordinary, that it defies language so often, because it does something for us which is emotionally and spiritually important. And I think it becomes, as you actually grow accustomed to it, you begin to realize how it is not something which is a luxury, but something which is beyond a necessity. It is an existential statement of humanity. It is the thing that defines who we are, that differentiates us from other species. It is the thing that I think that when our species is long gone, that we will be best remembered for, that are the space in which we come together, that we are born alone and we die alone, but the way in which we communicate most palpably, most powerfully, is through great art.
Right, and we're going to keep in mind Chris's question about how we can, because it's going to be core to you and your mission in DNA East, how can we get more interested, more people interested in the arts? How can we reach out to new people? But let's come on to the first section, which is talking about your own career. How did you get into this? You came, you were born into a celebrated Ghanaian family. You went to school in Dorset, then to art school, and then to SOAS in London School of Oriental and African Studies, and you did your PhD there. When did you feel that your career was going to go in the way it has?
I mean, I was blessed because from a young age I was aware that my siblings were special and different. I can remember one of my very first memories was of gazing over my brother's shoulder, and I couldn't have been more than, I think, 2 or 3, watching him draw. And my brother would go on to be a celebrated fashion designer. Indeed, we have items of his clothing in the V&A collection, and just watching him, and he couldn't have been, I imagine he was probably 10 or 11, but drawing with this incredible level of sophistication. And it was just that sense of someone being touched by something which just seemed otherworldly, and a realization of a kind of gift that is given to very few, but which we can all be blessed with the ability to appreciate, and realizing that this was something really special. And it's that kind of, that sort of lightning spark between kind of individuals, when you realize you're in the space with someone who's really special. And I watched my brother as this kind of creative force, you know, build this momentum around his own education and then career, but also my sister, who is a lawyer but also enormously creative, my other brother who went into television, and that they were all older than me, but they had in each of them a kind of level of commitment to their discrete careers, which was deeply inspirational. I realized that if you give everything to something, that you can actually transcend yourself and become and deliver something extraordinary. And I didn't possess anything like their skills, but I worked hard and managed to, as you say, get to art college, go on from there to SOAS. And the thing I realized was I may not have the gift to create, but I adore watching others create, and I adore talking about that incredible crackle that you get when you're in the presence of creative genius. And I wanted to find ways of being in that space of communicating it, whether it be through writing, through television, through teaching. I wanted to be part of the machinery of communicating how amazing the arts can be and how transformative they can be for everyone. Whether you don't need to be born into a wealthy family or have the privilege of great education, the beauty of art is it can be like watching my brother, a piece of paper and a biro, and with those two things that you can create something extraordinary.
And there's a lot out there in the media, if watchers don't know about the amazing family that you come from, and indeed your sister is a very good friend of our university here at Buckingham and is a brilliant Chancellor of Coventry University. Now, one of our regular viewers, Cherry, is picking you up there. We won't come back to it now, but on the word healing, art is healing, and also art spiritually, the spiritual dimension. But tell us, Gus, what was your first job? How did you get into the world of work? And, you know, bearing in mind there's so many young people now who would love to have careers in the arts, actually who would love just any job at all.
Yeah, and
other than dominoes.
Exactly, and I'm with them. I understand that it can be frustrating and it can take an awful long time to begin to ascend the ladder, and I absolutely took the long way round. If you look at my CV or my career biography, it just looks like a kind of just a random scramble of different cultural institutions, and I have worked in a variety of capacities as a volunteer. I've worked and served on boards. I've worked as a freelancer in a multiplicity of different capacities, and edging my way into a place where I could eventually find a full-time role. And my first role was working at the British Museum as a very junior education specialist, but even there, in that role, that I loved it, and my specialism in Africa was something which I found really could be realized with that collection. But the thing that really frustrated me was looking around me and seeing the lack of diversity in my colleagues and wanting it to feel better reflected in the narratives and in the collections I saw about me. And so I was to become the very first diversity champion at the British Museum, and it's something that I've done with every single institution that I've worked with Tate, with the National Trust, and even in my capacity now at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where I absolutely have a full portfolio in thinking about trying to build a new institution, to recruit a new staff, to raise the money for all of that, and to create the profile. Simultaneously, I also want to make sure that we can build a more equitable sector. And so I am trying to work with other museum directors, to work with other people within our institution to find ways of changing the demographic profile, particularly of the curatorial force, but to really begin to make a difference that we all, I think, all reasonable people feel is long overdue in trying to change the sort of ethnic profile of museum staffs.
So let's take museums up first. Your own career, you've been right at the sharp end of it, Gus, at the British Museum onwards. Did you feel discriminated against in the British Museum, consciously or unconsciously? And what did you do there? What did you learn? What have you learned along the way that you're going to employ at V&A East?
I think most people of colour don't, it's not the kind of discrimination that is absolute, of someone coming up to you and saying something or doing something which is in a way the most frustrating, because you can usually address that directly. The kind of discrimination which is really tough is the more ineffable institutional, cultural forms of discrimination that sit just in the ether, and that they can create forms of blockage which are invisible even to the people who control those institutions, who are in positions of power. And we see that, or people who are open to it will see that in most major institutions across the Western world, that we do tend to perpetuate patterns, and through employment, the sorts of profile of staffs that are like ourselves. And it's something which is generally unconscious, and most people would really hate to be seen as being discriminatory in any way. And so when you do broach these things with people, it's never the individual who will acknowledge to being the problem. It is the ambient and the institutional area in which most people identify the areas of blockage. And it's to that I think we probably need to apply our focus, because I think most people will move with ambient pressure, because I think most people understand that the rationale for it is absolute for change is absolutely there, and that the kind of status quo is not something that one looks to America. It's not something that really most people would want to tolerate. And so I think that we're in a place now where there is an opportunity for true generational change, and I'm really excited by that. And I think that there's a generation, particularly in Gen Z, who feel it is so long overdue and are so disappointed at our generation for dragging our heels on this. And I think it's time that we actually do the hard work of making the changes. And it's not difficult. This is more about us actually opening the doors and the windows and letting the light in. It's not actually about us doing, it's not tough. It's about actually allowing the structures that actually exist to do the things that they were set up to do, and actually not doing some of that sort of quiet stuff that happens of second guessing, of employing people that are like us, of worrying what other people might think. Let's just do the right thing.
So there'll be people listening to this from all kinds of backgrounds, from the arts, from the university sector. Our own diversity and inclusion committee will be watching this now. There'll be people from companies, there'll be students. You know, this is something we've all got to do, and we've ought to do better at it. And just more thoughts on what we can all be doing, so that the 2020s are a better decade as we go forward.
But after the death of Stephen Lawrence, that there was, you know, with the work that went on, that there was legislation that made it an obligation for public institutions to do this work, that there is a legal imperative, there is a financial imperative, in that there are our customers of whatever kind, whether they be students or in museums, whether they be our visitors. There are the moral reasons that it just cannot be that we can continue to discriminate against certain groups. There is the reason, the intellectual reason, that we are limiting the scope and the possibilities for the delivery in the key areas in which we are here to deliver. The intellectual possibilities that might that might open up if we were to begin to broaden the demographies from which we both choose our students and our visitors, but also if we thought about our programming and our lectures and our lecturers, it would transform our institutions. And there are so many reasons to do it. But I just think beyond all of that, we should do it because we know it's the right thing to do. And that there are very few people who would actually inherently argue against it. None of us singly who are sensible want to be the point of resistance. But around us is the ambient culture within which we see that. And I think now, at this point, there's a time in which that broader cultural resistance that has been the safety blanket that has meant that we haven't had to do the hard work. I think that has been clearly been demonstrated to be a thing that is worn with discomfort and that we need to throw it away. We can throw that blankie away and we can actually stand up on our own 2 feet and actually say that it's time to embrace diversity, to embrace equity, whether that be racial or gender or in terms of sociology and demography. It's time for us to embrace fairness and to do it as a way of particularly for Britain at this time in which we negotiate our place beyond Brexit, a new nation, that we want to empower a generation and to begin to think about how every member of our society can make a contribution which realizes their potential in ways that they would feel are fit. And so our country is so full of snobbery and prejudice and limitations and barriers. Let's break down those barriers and let people in.
Now, does fairness mean that universities, for example, and museums should positively discriminate in favour of BAME students because they haven't had the same educational advantages and employment opportunities of others? So just a quick question there.
I would love to see ways of absolutely diversifying the student base, and anyone who's been to inner city schools and seen the difference in the provision that students have compared to some of our best schools, and then we judge them using the same criteria, the same sets of category when it comes to the most important tests of their lives, tests that will define potentially their professions and their futures as adults. If we can find ways of creating a more even playing field, what is wrong with that? It's been utterly it's been curated and is utterly unfair up until that point. If we can find ways of evening things out a little to favour particularly other kinds of talent, I think what is wrong with that? I doubt I would have had the opportunities I've had if it wasn't for certain people who looked at me and thought, you're worth a try, you're worth my investment, and you're going to come under my wing, and I am going to try to give you a chance. And I hope I have paid back some of that. But I know we've all had those figures. But there are people out there who do not have those mentors. They do not have those opportunities. And so if we can structure the society in ways that we can occasionally just put the ladder down a few rungs and help people who are struggling, I think that's a good thing.
And how, just a very quick response on this, because we could give the whole talk to it, but David Olashoga with the Taggart lecture talking about the difficulty for BAME people in the BBC? How far do we go with statues, with singing on the last night of the proms? Does this discourage young BAME people from thinking they should even try? How important is the symbolism? No,
but the fact is that David was standing on a stage, and he is celebrated, probably the most celebrated British historical broadcaster at the moment, that it may well be that there is huge resistance to change, but there is occasionally the talent that can actually break through glass ceilings, and through those cracks others can also ascend. And I think that offers a kind of opportunity of transformation for us all. You know, the belief that women can't do it, or people of colour can't do it, that these kinds of strange, anachronistic ways of thinking about the world have to be swept aside. You know, I was just thinking back that if you think 100 years ago, that, you know, that in the First World War, that peoples from across the whole of the empire who were opposing colonialism, so many of them actually put down their placards. They actually stopped their resistance to fight in the Great War on the side of Britain, and millions were to lose their lives in one way or the other, many of them working as porters in all kinds of ways, you know, and not be acknowledged for that contribution. And women as well in that First World War, that they, again, that they put aside their calls for suffrage, and they worked in many of the jobs that the men at the front had held, and that they put into suspension their hopes for freedom and self-realization in the hopes that those things would be given to them in the future. And for so many people who sit on the periphery, it's not just that they suffered, but they have done the hard work of trying to underpin the progress of everyone. And when there are times like in that First War, when we were all suffering, they were there with us in various fronts, fighting the good fight, making the sacrifices as well. But then they aren't there generally when the medals were given out. They aren't there acknowledged in the histories. They aren't there. They aren't there on the plinths. And I think we have to write some of that, because it's good for us and it's good for them. But also it encourages people who sit on the periphery, who work hard and who want to contribute and do the right thing, that when they do that, that they will be acknowledged and given a fair chance. And we are a nation that believes in fairness. So let's do that, and I think we will all prosper.
So there's questions from Jill, for example, one of our psychologists, about creativity. We'll come on to that. I just want to take you through some of your own broadcasting, the BBC's Lost Kingdom of Africa. Tell us about that, Gus.
And that was wonderful. Well, it was one of the most enjoyable periods of my life, doing 2 series, telling the stories of pre-colonial Africa, stories which are too little known. You know, I mean, for me, one of the most powerful, that story of medieval Mali, this amazing kingdom that had incredible wealth. I'm sure we all know that story of Mansa Musa, possibly the wealthiest man who ever lived, but who didn't invest in expensive baubles, but invested in education, building one of the finest libraries that Africa has ever seen, but then also going on Hajj, traveling to Mecca with I think something like 50,000 of his supporters, and giving away as he went huge amounts of gold, so much gold he gave away in Cairo that he collapses the price of gold for the next decade, goes to Mecca, prays, meets the great intellectuals who've come from Alhambra and have come from North Africa and the Middle East, and they all are absolutely enthralled with this intellectual prince who's come from West Africa. And then he returns home, and he builds one of the great mosques of West Africa, because he's brought with him one of the great architects of the ancient world. And he represents a kind of...
Where is that? And still standing?
This is still standing in Timbuktu. And, you know, if you think for us in everyday parlance, Timbuktu is a place that is kind of beyond, that is unknown. But this was, in the medieval world, it was a kind of a center, an intellectual center, a university in which tens of thousands of people would gain the equivalence of degrees in all kinds of things, from astronomy to geography to all forms of irrigation and engineering. And it was a magnificent, a kind of Renaissance before the Renaissance within Africa. And we don't teach our young people about this. And it's the kind of empowering information, I think, which could transform not just lives, but people's sense of themselves. And that's something which I was delighted to be able to be a part of telling in that series and that book. And we made 8 films over a couple of years, and I adored it.
And your book, Timbuktu, published by Penguin in 2018. The year before, you did Tate Walks with Sky, 2017, with some incredible people. Tell us about that.
And for me, that is another. It's two series which I did, and I absolutely adored making. And it speaks to the things that really matter to me. It's a series which, in each episode, tells the story of a single piece of landscape art within the Tate Britain collection. And for each week, I would invite a guest. It could be Helena Bonham Carter, it might be Simon Callow, and I would select a painting that spoke in some way to something connected to their biography. And we would then go and we'd walk in those landscapes that had inspired the creation of that work, but to not just tell the story of the guest, and reflect on the connections between the guest and the work, but to also tell and discover the story of the artist. And as a way of talking about not just the importance of art, but what actually drives creativity, it was a fantastic frame. And, you know, just before I was speaking to you, I got a number of emails because Sky continued to repeat that series, and the actual channel Sky Arts goes free to air, I think, in September, so anyone can watch these series. And I think for me, they are what broadcasting should be about, because they spoke about the art in ways which I think I would have wanted to hear as a child, that was about messages that were accessible, but at the same time not patronizing. But similarly, at the same time, it was about imparting art history without compromise, telling the story of difficult lives and troubled creative processes and great sacrifice that went into making some of the finest pieces of art within the Tate collection. I felt proud of it, not just because I thought it was good television, but because it did something about communicating quite what would have been seen to be quite either complex or academic narratives in ways that could be seen as being entertainment, that these were programs that could go on at peak viewing time, and you could sit down and you could watch with multiple generations of within a family and all get something from. I thought it was a great format, and I look forward to doing more in the future.
I'm wonderful. I'm encouraging everyone here to go and look up these things. I'm sure people will do that. I'm going to take a question here, picking up about creativity from Jill, which is her research, one of her research interests, and the work she's done on creative genius and gender stereotypes and socioeconomic status, finding, for example, that women of lesser economic background can be seen as less likely to be creative and exceptional. And she'd like your thoughts, Gus, on your thoughts on racial and ethnic stereotypes and how they, and indeed social disadvantage stereotypes, how they impact on people's own sense of progress in their creative endeavour.
Well, I know from my own experience what that can be like, of so many times people's expectations of me being limited, of them, you know, of being told so many times, well, we really wouldn't want you to make a program that was about anything other than issues connected to race, that we really wouldn't want, you know, to hold me within a particular box, a set of particular career objectives that suited the sorts of stereotypes that one sees fulfilled in so much of life. And you have to have either great friends and support around you, but also great determination to find ways of breaking out of that. And if one layers on top of the sorts of experiences that I had, if I was to imagine what it might like also to be dealing with gender as well, to deal with sexism, I can imagine it being incredibly restrictive. And, you know, I take my hat off, I bow down to this incredible generation of very strong ethnic minority women who are breaking out of those constraints and who are demonstrating in a variety of different professions that they can reset the paradigm and become examples for us all, not just of how to deliver in particular areas of careers, but how to actually defy other people's expectations and not to be thwarted by obstructions and barriers. And many of those things are the sorts of barriers which are semi-invisible to others, and so you suffer that sort of prejudice alone, and it can be inordinately painful. And the higher you get up the greasy pole, the fewer peers that you have. So the less chance you have of reaching out to others and showing vulnerability, because with that vulnerability comes an opportunity to pull you back down. So for those people that have made it, I think we need to be celebrating them. And the tragic thing is, you know, you look at the media, and those people are so often targets for the trolls, for the critics. They are the people who can't get momentum in terms of their careers, in terms of television. There are so many people who are given chances with a single series for television who are ethnic minority, whereas, you know, if they had been Caucasian, that they would have been given multiple opportunities to try to succeed. And it's how we actually support those people, build networks, how, when you see those people, how we encourage them, even if we don't know them. As I was just telling you, this email that I got from this man, he writes to me every single time I make a program, and I read and I respond, because these things mean a lot to me. Because I can tell you, every single time I make a program, I get a huge number of people who just want to tear me down for the exact inverse reasons. And so how we find ways of supporting those people, because they are quietly having to deal with a whole load of really kind of unpleasant stuff. And the fact that they've got as far as they have is in large part down to their own quiet fortitude. And I think they are so seldom patted on the back because of that. And I think, you know, it's something that we need to do.
Indeed, indeed. Did you find things different and more open and inclusive when in 2018 you went to Washington as the director of the Museum of the Smithsonian African Art, a part of the Smithsonian?
America is such a different place in this relation in this area, that everything is heightened, opportunity is heightened. So the most senior roles within the Smithsonian are held by ethnic minority peoples, and that would not happen in Britain. And yet at the same time, that one is aware of the huge polarizations of the very narrow conduits for success, of the huge cost if you do make a mistake. And so everything is heightened and tougher, and the rewards can be greater, but it makes the pressures enormous. And, you know, I thoroughly enjoyed my time there, and I wouldn't change that period of my life for anything, because I learned an awful lot and made a huge number of friends, and we achieved a great deal. But there is something about Britain which I love, in which we suffer many of the same kinds of problems. We have the same sorts of barriers. Our history is just as problematic, and we haven't got to the stage as a nation of going through a period of recognition of some of these difficult histories in the way that America has begun to. But nevertheless, that there is something about a kind of British culture that makes it easier to be in, just to simply to be in, which is refreshing. And you know, as a father, that this is a place that I would much prefer my daughter to grow up in, whether, you know, she realizes her dreams or not. I think that this is a place where just being a citizen is something that you can do without that kind of deep and complex weight that everyone is aware of every day in the US as a minority.
Did Donald Trump come and visit your museum?
We had, you know, when you're on the director of the Smithsonian, you're aware that Mike Pence is ultimately on the board of the institution, even if that is a nominal thing. You're aware that the states sponsor what you do. You're aware of your responsibility to all American people, and you're also aware that you're living within Washington, D.C. And so, you know, my daughter would go to school with, you know, the Trump, one of the Trump's children, that one's aware of all of the kinds of connections that mean that it's important that you find ways, whether you agree with your political adversaries or not, you find ways of communicating and living with them harmoniously. And those are lessons which are good to take on board. And, you know, I think I had hoped that I was a museum director that demonstrated that as a guest of America, that I was trying to create an institution that was inclusive of everyone, whatever their political persuasion, and that I was deeply grateful to America for investing in our institution and in me to deliver fantastic programming and tell the story of African art in ways that no other institution on earth has or could.
And are there museums and galleries ahead of those in Britain, in a word?
in certain ways, you know, that they are well, particularly in terms of fundraising, that they are extremely sophisticated, and we have things to learn in that regard. But there are things that we do which so much better. We are so much better in relation to our audiences and our wider constituencies, that we think about marketing, and I personally think, in terms of our actual programmatic delivery, that the quality of exhibitions in Britain, get to the British Museum, which has just opened, you know, go to the National Gallery and see some of the, but come to the V&A as well. Just the sheer academic quality of what we're delivering, and the delivery in terms of our marketing and our audience development, that stuff is second to none, better than anywhere else on earth.
Lots of questions. Do they have as good director? What is a great museum director? What makes a Neil MacGregor?
If you look, Google the job description for a National Museum director and just have a look at the list of requirements. It's impossible. There is no person that other than the one or two people who are almost kind of godlike, you know, the Neil MacGregors and the Nick Sirotas, who manage to combine that huge portfolio of skills at an incredibly high level. But to be someone who can communicate well externally and internally, to lead curation, to be able to fundraise and to deal with running fundamentally a business at the end of the day, but at the same time be able to speak to constituencies of academics and artists who are very particular in the way in which they think about the world, to speak to audiences and then to government, to convince them that you are the right kind of institution to not just fund, but to tell the story of Britain as a National Museum director.
So which of those skills, Gus, are you most worried about in your job? Which are you think you're most lacking of in the V&A East?
Oh my word! Oh my God! This is well, I'm actually now 6 months, and I'm just doing my kind of my first. Yes, exactly. And so I'm beginning to.
You can tell me no one's listening.
Okay, no one's listening.
You haven't got hundreds. No, but just give me a general sense of that multifaceted job.
It is tough, and
like being a vice chancellor, there's so many different demands.
And the nature of my character is that I obsess about the things that go wrong, about the things that I feel weak in, and you know, that's where my mind is at 4 a.m. And you know, for me, I am naturally very, very introverted, and I think that's the reason why I chose television presenting and lecturing, because I knew that it actually would address the very thing which is inherent to me, of wanting to kind of to be in the corner of a room and disappear. And I knew that this would be a way in which that would be impossible. So what I have tended to do is to look at areas of weakness and address them head on. And I'm someone, you know, I went to art college and I continued to draw and paint, and I know that side of my brain is the side that is I'm naturally inclined to. And so for me, the spreadsheets and the organizational planning are the things that I spend the largest amount of my time on, because I know that I'm actually trying to address what is in me a natural weakness.
And give us 3 things that we should be watching out for in V&A East that are going to make it just wonderful.
Well, architecturally, it is going to be incredible. I mean, the collection centre, which is going to house 250,000 objects, 900 archives, but as an architectural proposition, this is a box which has all of these objects, but they are displayed in such a way, and it's accessible to anyone, so you can come in. It's not like a kind of closed collection centre, and we've made it feel accessible in in ways that I think no other building has in the past. Glass floors, glass ceilings. So you can stand in the center of the building and you can see the 250,000 objects in all of their boxes. It is like having a kind of cabinet of curiosities, but rather than standing above it and gazing in, you are actually in the very center of it. I mean, for me, that's something I'm hugely excited by. And
so
then
the building.
Well, that is the building of the collection centre, and our institution is two buildings. The other building, which is going to be is just the museum, which is on the waterfront, and it's adjacent to a parade of other institutions: Sadler's Wells, London College of Fashion, a new BBC set of auditoria, University College, and in my mind, within that context, our building is the most gorgeous, and it's a four-story exhibition space within which we want to tell new kinds of stories that will be first-person expositions of some of the most talented creative forces in the world today. So I think those two buildings are certainly things that I want you to come and see, and then programmatically that animating that collection, but doing it in ways post COVID, but also thinking about the world through a lens of sustainability, in which we aren't going to want to travel, that we want to bring you the world to East London. And this is a bit of London which has traditionally not had that much in the way of subsidized culture, and yet has given us generations of great creatives. And so we want to pay them back with fantastic programming, but also to bring great creatives from around the world. But we also want this to be a proposition which feels like it is national and global. So we want to offer the most brilliant and dynamic and innovative digital tools that will speak to that Gen Z and make them feel like it's a space which is theirs wherever they are, that will aid them whether they are involved in formal education or whether they want to come and engage with what we're doing just for sheer pleasure, or if they want to choose one of the areas of the arts that we celebrate potentially as a profession. We want to give you the tools to realize your own dreams.
Okay, and with no time to think about this, we're going to close with you selecting your favourite piece of music that you're going to have on your desert island.
Oh my
you were allowed one choice.
It's probably a bit miserable actually, but and it's a bit cliched. But I was actually listening to Fauré's Requiem this morning, yep. And it is such a gorgeous thing. And
great choice. So you're going to have Fauré, and I was speaking to Tristram Hunt, the overall director of the V&A, earlier, and he said you can have one object from the V&A collection. Real. What are you going to take? Plunder from the V&A collection?
East or anyway. There was a period of time when the V&A curators took bits of the collection in the 1950s out to the British population, and they built a particular collection that was transportable, but which told the story of vast areas of the world through creative practices that demonstrated a variety of different kinds of creative technique. And amongst that particular collection is a wonderful piece of Ghanaian woven cloth, which is purple, and it's a series of hearts which are appliqued onto a piece of embroidered burgundy fabric. And it sounds
fantastic. Sounds fantastic, and it is yours, Gus, to look at along with listening to the Fauré, and really wonderful to have you as our guest. Next week we've got, amongst others, Marie Elsa Bragg from another famous family dynasty, talking about spirituality and wholeness, amongst many others. But Gus, thank you for a wonderfully energetic and vibrant and stimulating and important talk from us all here. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
That's a privilege, Anthony, and thank you to everyone for listening as well.
Thank you, and good night.